Alright, well hello to all of our friends and family at Milford. We just wanted to send this video update and give you somewhat of an idea of how things are going here, what we do. Me and Shane, we wrote down a couple questions of different things that if we got a video update from another missionary, what things would we be interested in knowing about them? So some things like, what is it like where you live? What exactly do you eat during the day? What's a typical routine? What's border life like? How have the kids grown? How big are they now? What are some difficult parts in culture? And so we won't be able to answer every single question, but we wanted to show you some clips, some videos, and just whether it's clips of a medical trip that we've been able to be part of, going to some of these far out communities, whether it is just doing schoolwork at the house, whether it's just doing puzzles in our spare time when the power goes out. So we just want to give you some videos and clips and just give you an idea of what all that we do in a typical day. So we hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for praying for us, and I hope you enjoy this video. Pushing the trike all by himself. He's such a big boy.
Vamos lá, começa assim. Agora vamos. Passa o tempo lá, passa o tempo lá.
good morning. I hope you're having a good Sunday school. I hope you enjoyed the video, what you've seen so far. I would just want to kind of start closing it out with a short devotional. And my devotional is going to be in Jonah. It'll go through the entirety of the book, but really it's a short book. It's only a few verses that I'm going to be focusing on. And the idea behind this is why we do missions. Just a short, simple idea of why we do missions, why we go, why we try to reach people. And it may seem odd to pick Jonah, because even though, yes, Jonah's a good picture of an Old Testament missionary, Jonah also didn't want to go to the Ninevites. He didn't want to go to the Assyrians. And so, but I want to take a different look at this whole story. Instead of focusing on Jonah and what he did or what he didn't do, what he should have done, I want to look at Nineveh. Because in the book of Jonah, God actually describes Nineveh as that great city. He mentions it, there's 4 different times in Jonah where it describes Nineveh as that great city. And that's what I want to look at, that's what I want to focus on right now. So the first time we see it is in chapter 1, verse 2. I'll go ahead and read the first couple of verses. Now the word of the Lord came unto Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. And the next time that we see the same phrasing is in chapter 3. And the word of the Lord came unto Jonah the second time, saying, and this is verse 2 where the second time is mentioned, Arise, go unto Nineveh, that great city, and preach unto it the preaching that I bid thee. The third time is mentioned in verse 3. So Jonah arose and went unto Nineveh, according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceeding great city, a 3 days' journey. And the next time that we see God mention Nineveh as that great city is in the end of chapter 4, after the city of Nineveh has repented, after Jonah has gotten angry. And in verse 11 it says, And should not I spare Nineveh, that great city, wherein are more than 60,000 persons that cannot discern between their right hand and their left, and also much cattle. And going back to the first point, going back to the reason of why do we do missions, why do we have outreach, why do we go out and tell people about God's message? And the first lesson that I see here, the first point that I see here is that it's because God said to. Verse 1, Now the word of the Lord came unto Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city. God told Jonah to go, and God has told us to go, whether it's in our Jerusalem, our Judea, our Samaria, our uttermost. God's told us to go. And that really should be reason enough for us to go because God said so. Thankfully, though, God knew that there was people like me who are always going to ask, oh, why? I mean, yes, I understand I'm going to obey, but why do you want me to do this? Why do you want me to do this specific thing? And God elaborates on this, thankfully. For people like me who want to know more of the why, God elaborates, he says, Cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. Obviously, we know God is a perfect God. He's a holy God, a righteous God. And us in our sinful state, the world in its sinful state, that's a pale comparison to what God calls holiness, what God calls righteousness. And God sees all this. He knows this. And he says, go tell them that they're wicked. Go tell them that they're sinful, that they need to repent of this. God told Jonah to go, and God tells us to go today because the world needs to hear that message. The world needs to know that they're in a state of sin, that they've broken God's laws, and they're not going to know that unless someone goes and tells them. How shall they hear without a preacher? Someone has to proclaim that message, and that's why God sent Jonah, and that's why God asks us to go. Because the world needs to hear that message that they're sinful, but there is a God that they can go to. Now the next time, the second point, next time we see that God calls Nineveh that great city, is in verse 2 he says, Arise, go unto Nineveh, that great city, and preach unto it the preaching that I bid thee. Now when I read that second point, I didn't understand, because all this does is echoes what he said in chapter 1. But when you look at the context of these verses in between, you realize Jonah disobeyed, he went the opposite direction. He repented of his disobedience, And so God is coming back to Jonah and says, okay, back to square one. This is what I want you to do. I want you to go preach to Nineveh, that great city. And the whole point, I think, that God is trying to make to Jonah is that, yes, you messed up. Yes, you sinned. Yes, you disobeyed. You ran away. You did the exact opposite. I still have a message that's supposed to be preached. I still have something that the world needs to hear, and I want to use you to do it. I think that there's a lot of times that Satan can use this idea that when we've sinned, when we've run away from God, when we've messed up, or maybe we've kind of done what the disciples did after Jesus was killed and they just went fishing. They didn't know what to do. They left it all. They weren't doing bad. They just weren't doing anything. And whatever state we get in, whether it is a state of disobedience, whether it's a state of just not wanting to do anything, God comes back and says, it's not about you. It's about me. And even when Satan tries to throw out these doubts of you've sinned, you've messed up, God doesn't want to use you anymore. You can't be used anymore. God still says, it's not about you. You're not the whole point of this message. I'm the point of this message. The gospel is the point. People are supposed to worship me. So it doesn't matter what you've done. You've repented of that. You've confessed that to me. Now get back out there and preach the message that you're supposed to do. Preach the message that I've given to you. And sometimes God gives us that encouragement. He gives us that exhortation that, okay, you've sinned, you've repented, now move on. Go tell the world. Go tell that great city that they've sinned. There's a Savior. Go look to Him. Sometimes we need that encouragement. The next point that I see here is it's almost a point where we need more encouragement right after the encouragement that God's already given us. And to explain, in verse 3, it says, So Jonah arose and went unto Nineveh, according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceeding great city of 3 days' journey. And the thing I want to point out about this is that this is Jonah's, or the writer of Jonah. This is his observation of Nineveh. This isn't necessarily God talking to Jonah saying, okay, this is a big city, this is a big job, I hope you can handle it. This was Jonah looking at the city and, wow, this is huge. And we can look at the world, we can look at all these unreached fields, we can look at all these, like even in the States, we can look at all the sin that there is. And we can get this idea like, wow, this is a big task. I was talking to some missionaries in this area, and between here and Iquitos in Peru, there's over 400 villages that have no church, no gospel presence. And I'm even throwing a wider net there of what churches can stand for, but that's just no churches. None in these villages. Over 400 between here and Iquitos on the river. I was talking with some missionaries in Colombia. There's millions and millions of people in Colombia, and there's only a handful of missionaries that are actually working in there, that are actually preaching the true gospel. You can go on from there. You're already aware of our mission, of our desire to work with the unreached tribes, and there's over 70 just in Brazil, unreached, uncontacted tribes, just in Brazil. Man, that's a huge task, and that's just South America. That's not even going over to Africa, going over to Asia, where there's millions and millions of people, all kinds of unreached people groups, just in India, just in China, and we look at that and we think, wow, that's a really, really big task. But then we have to walk back and say, okay, it's not about us. It's not about what we think we can or cannot do. This is about God. This is about the message that He has asked us to preach. And so day by day, 3 days journey in there, let's preach the gospel. Let's spread that message. Let people know they've broken God's law. They've sinned. But there's a God that they can go to. We need that encouragement to realize that, yes, the job's big. But our God is big. Our God is bigger than this task. And the last point here and chapter 4, verse 11. This all comes after Jonah has thrown his fit. He's preached to Nineveh. They've repented, and then he goes up and he waits to see if God is still going to judge them anyway, because he's harboring all this bitterness, all this anger against Nineveh. And if you look at it from a historical perspective, you understand why the Jews, why Jonah hated Assyria so much, why they hated Nineveh so much, because the Assyrians were cruel. They were horrible people. Whenever they went in to conquer a land, they had some horrible, torturous practices that they would put on the people there. And so Jonah has nothing really but anger and hate towards these people, and he says they deserve this judgment. They deserve to be destroyed. And so he waits to see if God is going to destroy them or not. Jonah has a prejudice against the people. And God has to come back and he has to say, no, should I not spare Nineveh? God, who created these people, who made them in the first place, should I not spare them? God, who these people are sinning against, he says, I'm going to show mercy. Shouldn't you show mercy? And we think, okay, that's easy. I'll try to be merciful. I'll try not to show prejudice. But then we started to think, I know, for me, this hit really hard when I was thinking about it. Because here in my area, you see a lot. Especially, you see a lot of drunkenness. And it's not a weekend thing. This is an everyday thing. And I've seen a lot of drunks on one particular corner. They're always there. It's always the same group of guys. And every once in a while you notice they may change. They may be gone for a day or two. They've sobered up and then they're right back in it. And I know for me, that's some of the last people that I want to talk to. Much less give them the gospel. And I was out getting some supplies with John, with our missionary partner, John Hernandez. And this drunk guy, he comes up and he starts talking to me. And he won't leave me alone. And he's not even speaking Portuguese. He's Colombian. He's speaking Spanish. And I don't know much Spanish at all. I can understand some, but I can't speak it. And so I'm just trying to ignore the guy. I don't want to talk to him. I just want to get away. I want to finish the job and I want to get away. And this guy just keeps talking and keeps talking. And then I realize, from what I'm understanding from John talking back to him, he was inviting him to church. He said, come on Sunday and you'll hear the gospel. Come and you can know more about God. And I was so convicted because I didn't want to talk to this man. I don't want to give him the gospel. I had a prejudice there already that I didn't want to have anything to do with him. But God still said, it doesn't matter who it is. I decided to show them mercy. I decided to show mercy to all of them. And so it's a warning. It's a conviction, a reminder to me that just like Jonah, I can get in that same state where I don't want to give God's message to people. I don't want to give it to specific people because in my mind, I've already made that decision that they don't deserve it. Well, none of us deserve God's gospel. None of us deserve God's grace. God still gave it freely. And we should preach that message freely.